At this point, we're moving into our program. I'd like to say a little bit about our first speaker, but even before that, I want to talk about the work of the Coalition. And the Coalition has been focused on long-term student well-being since its beginning. And we talk a lot, and you see in our literature and the things that we send out, we talk about student identity, sense of identity, agency, purpose, belonging. But we realize that that's not all of what forms a lifetime of well-being. There is so much more that is part of our lives, part of students' lives, that are things to be considered. And we've continually thought about that within the Coalition and realized a big important part of developing a sense of well-being, and in fact, Rick has done a lot of research into this, is really, and built off of the research of others, is really looking at things like character and ethics and virtue. So we in the Coalition have added that idea of character to what our mission is. A lot of people have identity, some agency, maybe some sense of purpose, but not necessarily in a way that's contributing to the greater good, to the common good, or things beyond themselves. That's another phrase that we use a lot. And that's important. That's incredibly important in the world today. That's an incredibly important message for our students. So we are bringing that idea of character into the Coalition. We're talking about identity, agency, purpose, belonging, and character. So we're really excited about that. We've learned from our keynote speaker, our first keynote speaker, Michael Lamb, an incredible amount, and we're still learning an incredible amount from him about his work and what he's doing, and we're going to talk about that. And I'll introduce Michael, but I have to first say that as many people experienced, there were travel difficulties in getting here. Michael ended up in Jacksonville, which is not close to Miami, and rented a car, showed his perseverance and dedication, rented a car, and drove from Jacksonville to Miami, and checked into the hotel about 1:45. So he probably hasn't had a lot of sleep, but he looks really alert right now, and he's drinking lots of coffee, which is great. As I said, we've learned so much from Michael. We'll talk more about that. But I want to say a little bit more about his background and what he's doing at Wake Forest as a faculty member. So Michael is the F.M. Kirby Foundation Chair of Leadership and Character, Executive Director of the Program for Leadership and Character, and Associate Professor of Interdisciplinary Humanities at Wake Forest University. He's also an Associate Fellow of the Oxford Character Project. He earned a PhD from Princeton University, a BA from Rhodes College, and a second BA from the University of Oxford, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar. A recipient of teaching awards from Princeton, Oxford, and Wake Forest, he teaches courses and pursues research on leadership, character, and the role of virtues in public life. He's the author of A Commonwealth of Hope, Augustine's Political Thought, and co-editor of The Art of Leading, Perspectives from the Humanities and the Liberal Arts, Everyday Ethics, Moral Theology, and the Practices of Ordinary Life, and Cultivating Virtue in the University. And you can get a copy of that during the break. Michael will be signing books. They're set up over there. So please get a chance to meet Michael, talk to him, get him to sign your book, and get a chance for you to read about some of the great work that he's been doing. At Wake Forest, he is leading a major university-wide program to develop leaders of character in both the undergraduate college and professional schools. He is a co-leader of an $8.6 million grant from the Kern Family Foundation to develop character in the professions, and over a $40 million grant from the Lilly Endowment to create the Educating Character Initiative, which is helping to catalyze a national movement focused on character in higher education. Under Michael's leadership, the Educating Character Initiative has already given out over $18 million in grants, including to several institutions who are members of the Coalition. So I'd like to invite Michael to come up here and join me on stage so we can have a conversation together. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So hopefully, as you can still hear me through the lav mic. This is a chance for Michael and myself to have a nice conversation. It's also a chance for you to ask questions of Michael. We're going to talk for a few minutes. I have some things that I prepared, but I want you to be thinking about the questions that you have for his work. Maybe some of you know about it already, of course. Things that you'd like to ask that maybe build off of our conversation, build off of your own work in the coalition or build off of other things that you're involved in one way or another. So just to get started, Michael, how did you first get interested in studying character, and what most shaped your character when you were growing up?
Oh, well, thanks so much, Keith. And great to see you all. I see several friends in the audience, so it's great to see you all here today. And, I think for me, my character journey began very early. I grew up in a small town on a small farm in Tennessee. And when you grow up on a small family farm, you learn character very quickly about what it means to work, to trade labor with your cousins and your uncles and your grandparents to sort of make sure you're all getting things done around a common purpose. And so, when I was at 6 years old, I began working in the fields then, and then by 13, I had my own crop, which I used then to save the money over years to buy my first truck, which was very important for me at the time. So it really taught me responsibility. It taught me how to think about teamwork and about shared sacrifice for a good bigger than yourself, to use that phrase. So that was very important for my own upbringing. My family was a really amazing source of formation for me. My parents did not graduate from college, but they really taught me what it means to be a good citizen. My dad taught me sacrifice. He would go to work every day at the factory, drive 45 minutes, and then drive back that night, spend 8 hours standing on concrete, making engines for Nissan trucks, and then come home, change his boots, and go back out again to work on the farm. And he still made time amidst all that to coach Little League teams for us and to serve on the school board and lead our Lions Club. So that kind of real commitment to family, but also commitment to the community in a real way. My mother is someone in town who really just embodies like abundant love. I mean, she just really flows with this compassion. And so she was the one in town who was always gathering gifts or food for families at Christmas. When I was in Memphis at college, she heard from me that students I was tutoring there didn't have school supplies. So being from the pencil capital of Tennessee, she went around across the whole county and gathered a whole truckload, literally, of school supplies for students in Memphis. And so that kind of compassion, I think her vision for my life was very formed by that. When I was a senior in college, at a very critical moment, she sent me the letter she wrote to me in my baby book, the very first words to her son. And they were, "Dear Michael, I hope you become a compassionate and kind person, a forgiving person, one who helps those who are less fortunate than yourself." That was her first sentence to me. And I think you see from her own vision for who she wanted me to be, was character was at the center of that. So I owe a lot to her and my dad and how they formed me to be a person who cares about sacrifice, but also orients that sacrifice toward service.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Interesting story. I can't resist asking, so what crop did you grow?
Well, we grew up on a very small farm. We had about a few acres here. So I grew tobacco, actually, common crop in Tennessee. One of the few crops you can actually grow in a very small amount of land.
Okay.
But did that for years, and then had a real challenging college when I went there and was grappling with the ethics of growing tobacco. And so I spent my sophomore year grappling with my own complicity in this sort of industry. And so it was also part of my formation in ways that helped me understand. It was kind of taken for granted where I grew up. Everybody had done it. That's how you paid for your farm, because you couldn't raise corn. You didn't have enough land to raise corn. You couldn't raise soybeans. So tobacco was it. Okay. So I really grappled with that ethical complexity of what that meant to be part of that, even as I was growing in my ethical awareness. And so I ended up writing a letter to my dad in college about how I think we ought to stop growing tobacco.
Yeah, I can imagine that made a big impact on your character development and your thinking about character over the years as you've become more involved with it.
Yeah.
I want to follow up and ask another question that I alluded to in my remarks, and that is that we focus within the coalition on lifelong well-being, and we've talked about identity, agency, purpose, belonging. There are clearly other parts to it, and character is one of them. How do you see character connecting to what the coalition is doing and to that sense of lifelong well-being as we interact with our students?
Yeah, we understand character pretty broadly at Wake Forest. Think about the set of stable, reliable, enduring habits or dispositions that might shape how we think, feel, and act in the world. And character in that sense has been connected to flourishing for a very long time. Aristotle thought that flourishing was the aim or purpose of human life. And he thought character, various virtues, were the ways we actually achieve and sort of constitute that flourishing. And so I think now, though, you see a lot of research in psychology and education on connecting character and flourishing. So I know there's been work that the Harvard Flourishing Program has done to show the ways in which flourishing is a crucial part really requires its character a crucial part. I know Rick has a terrific paper on the ways that different virtues of character, from forgiveness and gratitude, honesty, humility, all contribute to well-being, even physical health and well-being. It's a really remarkable kind of confluence of impacts there. I think about these key ideas of identity and agency and purpose. I think, we think about identity often in various ways, but don't often include our moral identity, who we are as individuals and who we're known to be morally to people. And what research shows, including from colleagues at Wake Forest in psychology, that feeling like you're a moral person is a basic psychological need. They've done studies showing the ways in which it contributes to life satisfaction as much as autonomy or competence or connection with other people. And so it's a very important need for us. And if you look at studies also on cheating, for example, if you have experimental conditions where you have one group say, please take this test, do not cheat on this test, it might affect the results of our study, versus one that says, do not be a cheater, might affect the results of our study. One that appeals to identity, not to action. The identity one actually is one has less cheating. Because you don't want to be seeing yourself as a cheater, right? So identity really matters to us, but we often don't talk about it. So character is part of that identity in a broader way. You mentioned purpose, Keith, and I think, purpose not only gives us the aim of our character, but also we need character to actually achieve our purpose. If we don't have resilience when pursuing our purpose is difficult.
Driving in the middle of the night to get here to the conference.
Exactly. I was taught how to hustle, when I was growing up, and you got to have a little hustle when adversity kind of comes your way. If you don't have courage when you face fear of achieving your purpose, when you don't have self-control or temperance to pursue various priorities and not focus on the one that really calls you in a certain way, and if you don't have sort of justice or compassion to orient your purpose beyond yourself, then your purpose might be very narrow and it might be very self-focused in that way. And you might not actually achieve it because you need other virtues to achieve your purpose. So I think character really, without purpose, without character, I think agency is like an engine without a propeller or a rudder. Right? It might be moving, you might be going, but you're not going forward to something, and you're also maybe not going the ways that you should to get there. And so I think it's very important for that. I think finally you mentioned belonging. I think, we think a lot about belonging in an especially diverse context that we're in right now. And I think to do community building in that context, to foster belonging, requires key virtues of character: humility to recognize the limits of your own perspective, empathy to imagine others who are different from you, justice to give others the respect that they are due, and courage to do justice when it's not easy to do justice, right? So we need various virtues if we're going to build communities that really are welcoming to others and create the kind of hospitality and belonging that is crucial to what I think higher education should be.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of concepts that you were just mentioning that certainly we're also talking about in the words. One of the things that has been, I think, challenging for us in the coalition is finding the right words. Marge and I are actually going to be talking a little bit about that tomorrow. But flourishing is a word that we use a lot as well. Actually, the Harvard Flourishing Program is represented here with Reese Brown. I encourage you to get to meet him and talk to him. And the other things that you're thinking about, we had Bob Waldinger talk about the good life and what contributes to the good life. All of those things come together. So I think as a coalition, we continue to think about how best to connect with our students, how best to set them on that path, and how as educators that we can make that happen. So my next question really gets into that educational piece. Character has come back, maybe that's a way to say it. Certainly with the support that you have from the Lilly Endowment, you're recognizing that there's a hunger, a desire to think more about what this idea of character means for our students as we educate them. And in thinking about that, character, universities once made character really much more central to their educational mission. Many do not. Maybe that's changing. The pendulum is swinging a little bit. Tell us a little bit more about how you view that, what happened, what kind of interest you are seeking for this work across higher education.
Yeah, it's a great question, Keith. Historically, and there may be some historians in the room here, it is very much a part of university's mission in the early days of our country to focus on character as a part of that outcomes. So many college presidents would often teach a capstone course on ethics to all graduating seniors to graduate. It was very core to who they were. But you saw a shift then, and Julie Rubin from Harvard really notes this very well in her book on this topic, that you had the rise of the research university where teaching became less important in some places than research and production of knowledge. You had at the same time a real focus on value-neutral science to make it objective and fact-based, and character might be values-based, not fact-based. And so it often seemed not as objective to focus on in a university context. You also saw increasing diversity of the student bodies across America. As colleges rightfully diversified in their own sense of who could go and get an education there. And so in the early days of the country, it mostly was white men who were Christians who were getting character formation, right? So as we think about expanding that population in the 20th century, character then became, well, whose character are you teaching, right? So questions about sort of whose character became very important. So there was kind of a shift away from character then, but you then saw in the 1990s a kind of recovery of ethics, at least, not character, but ethics, after pretty high-profile scandals. Enron comes to mind, if you know those, where you saw real leadership lapses that reflected a lack of ethical awareness, lack of ethical reasoning. So there's a lot of work on ethical reasoning emerged then, but it wasn't focused on character. It was focused on really cognitive reasoning, right? So how do you think about not just cognitive reasoning, but also embodied ways of being in the world that might help us think about these questions? And so there was a movement, beginning in the 1980s or so, to recover virtue ethics and character as a part of our academic discourse. And that's really bled into education. In the early 2000s, you see character really being taken up by schools, especially K-12 schools, to make it part of their educational mission, but not many universities. This is very much a later development, about the last decade or so, and I owe that to the kind of rising research on character, to foundations like the Kern Family Foundation here, the John Templeton Foundation, the Lilly Endowment, who really wanted to emphasize character and support universities doing that work. And so now you see this, at a time when character seems really needed, a real appetite for it. So we're leading, as Keith mentioned, the Educating Character Initiative, which is aiming to help support other universities in developing programs focused on character in your own context, right? So it's really trying to expand this network, this movement around higher education. And we thought in our first year of grants we might get 30 or 40 applications from the kind of usual suspects, and we got almost 140 applications from institutions. This year, we just got our last grants in. 2 weeks ago, we had 170 applications. Wow. So the appetite is just extraordinary from very diverse institutions across the country, and seeing that also in faculty and staff as well. So we're really encouraged by that interest. I know several grantees are in this room, so it's good to see you all here. And I think there's just a lot of energy. And what we love about that work is it's not just a Wake Forest program. People are doing this in their own ways, in their own contexts that fit their institution. I think that's what's going to make it actually powerful and enduring there, right? A blueprint approach where you kind of just replicate it's not going to work in American higher education. We need to actually encourage people in their own context to be leaders there and do what fits for their own communities. I think I see that a lot now, and a lot of creativity coming from that community on how you might do this in different contexts.
Yeah, that's great. And actually that very much echoes what the Coalition does with the way in which we work with our members. Is we're not trying to create a blueprint or a particular algorithm or anything else for how to achieve for students lifelong well-being. It's about what works on your particular campus, right, what works for your particular faculty, your particular situation, your particular institutional history, which actually leads kind of into the next question, continuing on that idea of education. So there's a lot of interest, obviously, from institutions that are contacting you and thinking about what they're doing. For a lot of faculty, and we have a lot of faculty in the room and listening, there's always this question of, so how do I do that?
Yeah.
If I'm in a particular department, that might seem or feel easier. If I'm an engineer, I was an engineering faculty member, that seems maybe more challenging for someone like myself.
Yeah.
But so how do you do it kind of as an individual? They don't know exactly how to do this, but they want to do this. What are some of your research and your own personal experiences tell you about that?
Yeah, you might hear about character some, but think that many faculty might not be open to it. But the latest study of the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA found that 85% of faculty at four-year colleges thought it was part of their role to shape moral character. Right? That's really unique, right? It's hard to get faculty to agree on anything at that high level, right? Except maybe better parking, So I think there's a real interest, but many faculty don't know how to do that work well. And so what we found here is that giving them concrete-based strategies based on best practices and based on the research across various fields can really help equip them in ways to recognize, first, they're already doing it, right? That many of us are already doing character formation every day in how we model what we're doing and how we think about fostering reflection and really helping students develop certain habits of being in our own classrooms. We might not call it character, but it's character.
Yeah.
And so that's been an important part of this work. And then my colleagues and I have done a lot of research on what does research say about how character is best formed in education, in philosophy, in psychology, in neuroscience, and sociology. And so we've done a pretty comprehensive sort of survey of that research and found that there's kind of 7 basic strategies that are often used. They're kind of timeless, but now empirically grounded in the research. And so one of those is what you might expect is learning about virtue, gaining virtue literacy, to understand what virtue is, what characters are, why they matter for our world. 2 is through practice. You might know what virtue is, but if you don't actually begin to practice it or habituate it, you won't become virtuous. So virtue is just kind of like a skill. You have to develop it through practice over and over again. 3rd is through reflective practice, so reflection. You might practice the wrong thing, and that would not cultivate virtue but vice, right? So make sure you're reflective about that practice and bringing reflection into your life in very intentional ways. A 4th way to do that is by being aware of yourself, your situations, and your systems. Because these things shape us in ways that bias us, that might hinder our judgment, that might sort of redirect our attention. So being aware of how you're being formed and then making choices to sort of either counterbalance or correct those influences in your own life. 5th is through moral reminders, things that might remind us of who we want to be. So many universities in this room probably have honor codes, right, that serve as moral reminders of who you want to be as a student, as a person of integrity when you take a test or write a paper. And then 2 more, and these are both, I think, really central to this work. One is exemplars. Those role models who embody the virtues and give us a sense of what they look like in person. So for many, many generations, exemplars have been elevated by different traditions to sort of help us understand what it means to be good, to be courageous, humble, wise, or just. And I think doing that work with exemplars, be that through case studies or reading biographies or even your own modeling in the classroom, that's a very effective way to teach character. And then I'll add one more, the 7th one, which is friendship. I think this is vital. We don't teach our students about friendships enough, I think, in universities. So much of their time when they're in college is with friends. About 10 to 25 hours a week are with their friends, more than I spend in class usually. And their friends, research shows, are often their greatest teachers. We have mirror neurons in our minds, which are often imitating those around us in ways we don't even realize. And so choosing the right friends, maintaining friendships, not just of pleasure or usefulness, but of virtue, where you really hold each other accountable to the best vision of themselves, that is crucial to this work. And I think we can do more, as colleagues and as teachers to really foster friendships with our own teams, but also with our students especially.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And just to add to that, I think part of what you're saying is that really we are participating in character education whether we know it or not.
Yeah.
Every time we stand up as faculty members in front of a group of students and interact with them and communicate with them in whatever way is appropriate for our discipline.
Yeah.
We're setting an example, and we should be cognizant of that and take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it's just happening all the time. Formation is happening all the time, right? And so the values our institution sort of elevates and prioritizes the models that we present in the classroom. The way we think about character in our own classes, citing our sources is a matter of justice and gratitude, usually. Engaging our classmates with humility and empathy makes a good conversation in the classroom. We want our students to gain those virtues, and so it's not kind of a stretch to see what we're doing now as being part of that formation process. And if we can do that not just randomly or implicitly, but actually intentionally and critically, right? I think we can do it even better, and I want to help bring that critical intentionality to this work in the university.
Yeah, that's great. I can't resist. I know there's one particular course that you've been teaching, Commencing Character.
Yeah.
And I want to hear a little bit about your own experiences being that faculty member in the classroom and how you've engaged students and what kind of things you've done with yourself and with your students.
Yeah, it's my favorite class to teach. It's called Commencing Character, How Should We Live? And it's a course that actually uses commencement speeches with ancient ethics of virtue. Think about what it means to live a good life. So students read about 40 speeches across the semester on different virtues from different kinds of writers, from Toni Morrison and David Brooks to Atul Gawande and Brian Stevenson, and to some really inspiring speeches. And they have a variety of sort of assignments throughout the semester of reading about the virtues, interviewing their exemplars, even having a plan where they actually cultivate a virtue for 2 weeks very intentionally and reflect on that plan, like Benjamin Franklin did when he was a young person. But their very final assignment is to give their own commencement speech about their vision of a good life. And these speeches are just so profound, and it shows you, the teacher, what it means to actually have students really take this work seriously and earnestly. I think so often students can be quite cynical, but see their earnestness.
Faculty even more.
Faculty, yeah, absolutely. And I think when I'm cynical, I remember these speeches because they're just, I'm not a crier in class, I don't do it often. But every year, these student speeches, which are often very tender and very vulnerable about their own journeys and their own challenges in a way that's really showing tremendous courage in front of their peers, is just remarkable to me. And we've been doing studies of that course over the last few years and have shown actually through empirical research it actually does promote character. But what I've also seen is these sort of reflections from students saying that their peers' speeches was the most important part of that course. Hearing their peers do this, and they're going to be peers now, given their first semester, for 3 more years, right? 3.5 more years. So you're building friendships in ways that first semester where I think it's really powerful. And so it's just a really fun course to teach. Also for me, it's a fun course to think about what is the value of college? What is college for? And how do we sort of not just do that on the last day at commencement when we give a speech about how to live, but the very first day of class? Have students grapple with that in their very first semester on how they can think about character, not just knowledge and skill, but character is part of their own purpose in college. And so for me, it's really helped kind of animate and it's really like reinvigorate my teaching in the classroom.
Yeah, that's a great comment about connecting with students early in their educational journey. And we're actually going to be coming back to that and talking about students and the way that they design their life, their academic life when they're in college, but of course their life beyond that. So we'll come back to that as another topic later in the conference. And I want to step back a little bit. So talking about your own course, obviously you've had a big impact in the students that you're teaching, and obviously through the support of the Lilly Endowment and other Kern Family Foundation and other sources of support, you're seeing the growth of your work, and hopefully you're seeing the impact of your work. It's probably a little early to see exactly what's happening with these many projects that you're now supporting, but certainly on Wake Forest's campus, you're beginning to see the impact. Can you say more about the impact you're seeing on your campus and kind of where you see that growing and going beyond Wake Forest and what you hope to achieve with all of this work?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. This program began about 8 years ago when then President Nathan Hatch had a vision for the program and recruited me to help start it. And from there, it was just one person and a few ideas that we had. And now we've grown to actually a staff of almost 40 across the university who are doing this in the medical school, the law school, the college. We have a research team. We also have a team helping other universities do this work. So it's really amazing seeing the ways it's really grown. And that's grown because of good leadership. So President Hatch, now President Wente, Provost Gillespie, who's been an amazing advocate for us in this work at Wake Forest. So having sort of leaders really take it up has been crucial, but also having faculty and staff own it, right? That has been just crucial. So we've tried to find ways in the first few years to really connect it with their own aspirations, their own activities, their own course outcomes to make it really embedded in this way. And so now, we offer courses that we teach on character. We train faculty to design modules, mostly at Wake Forest. So we now expand that beyond Wake Forest. Aaron Anderson-Kamenzund was actually in our workshops last year from the University of Denver to really help spread this message beyond just the university. We offer student programming, retreats, workshops, sort of speaker series. We also do a lot of research on that to understand its impact. And that's been important for us to actually see what's happening, to improve it based on what we're learning, and then actually to share that in ways that might inspire others to be part of that work. And so we've had this a really exciting development in the last few years. We've gone from having just a team of 2 now to having an impact on campus. This past year, over 16,000 engagements that our program sponsored. Across campus, students, faculty, staff. That was over about 60,000 in the last 5 years, so a dramatic increase. And then through a grant, so we're actually funding now through the Educating Character Initiative. We have funded 71 institutions last year. We'll have more this year. And based on very conservative estimates of their own strategies for impact, we'll be able to impact over 200,000 people in the next 3 years through these grants. That's pretty extraordinary. And so our motto at Wake Forest is Pro Humanitate, for humanity. And so we see this work actually as being an expression of our motto, to be not just for our own university, but for humanity in this way. And I think what you all are doing here, what CTE is doing to really elevate this, I think will really help to kind of strengthen that movement in ways that makes it more powerful, but also more organic, where it could actually take root, and be contextually centered in each institution. We say a lot in our program that character education is for all, but it's not one size fits all. right? We have to do it in ways that really fit our own institutions and our own context. And I think seeing that now gives me great hope for higher education in the next decade.
Yeah, that's great. I can't resist, asking again. It's still early with the Educating Character Initiative, but as you're reading what other schools are doing, I'm sure there are a few that have caught your eye as being particularly innovative and maybe particularly impactful. Again, it's early.
Yeah.
But could you point out one or two that are particularly innovative that you really want to talk about a little bit more?
Well, I can look at this room and point out one or two here. I got several colleagues here who are grantees of our Educating Character Initiative who are doing really great work. Arizona State, for example, has really taken up character through their principal innovation approach to really connect character with their focus on innovation to make it really fit their university's spirit. They made a design principle of their university. Belmont, and I see Nathan here, has put character in its seal now. They added a new word to the seal, so purpose, character, and wisdom. And they're doing a lot of work now thinking about how to connect that across the curriculum, but also outside the curriculum and thinking about life skills. You have Notre Dame, who's doing this great work on virtues and vocations, to also train faculty to teach character. They had a great workshop last week there that one of our staff attended and just really loved. University of Florida has a grant from us to actually do this work in more intentional ways and build up a plan. And then, of course, there are many others around the country. Some like Tuskegee doing this from a very different tradition and drawing on their own resources from their history to ground their approach. You have some like Radford University who are focused on wicked problems, and how the character can address wicked problems. You have some like Aaron at University of Denver who are thinking about how character might connect to mental health and use that as a way to ground a focus on character to helping deal with anxiety or depression and other ways to encounter this. And then finally, you mentioned you're an engineer, Keith. UVA, another member of the CTE, is doing a great project on character and engineering and how to integrate character across the engineering curriculum. We've done that at Wake Forest ourselves, and that's been a really sort of vibrant area of growth in this field.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I have a couple more questions. I want to, again, open it up to the audience to make sure you have plenty of time to ask questions, but I have two more. One is from Rick that I wanted to pass along. Okay. Since he couldn't be here, I wanted to make sure that I had a chance to ask this for him. Rick is very data-driven. As you mentioned, the work that he's done linking character to lifelong well-being. He was really looking for that evidence, the data. And he wanted to ask specifically is about, how do you know whether those who have had character education turn out to live character-driven lives later in life, lives that are measurably different or better than those of students who have not had such experiences?
Yeah. Well, I think there's growing research on this now in psychology and sociology that shows that people who are of good character do have more flourishing lives. Especially now we see that just income levels actually don't move the needle on flourishing. I know you mentioned Bob Waldinger's study at Harvard over 75 years, tracking what's most meaningful for adults. And they found that relationships were the most meaningful part of this work, right? Having quality relationships, really more than anything else, more than income, education level, affected our life satisfaction. Well, think about your relationships. Think about your best friend, right? Or your spouse. And you try to describe them, you'll probably use character terms. They are kind. They're compassionate. They're honest. They're humble. They care for me in some ways, right? So these virtues are crucial to good relationships. And good relationships are actually crucial to flourishing. So there's a great connection between character and flourishing in that way. And so I think you see that. We see that some now at Wake Forest. We're seeing that students in our programs compared to control groups are actually growing in various virtues and their sense of purpose pretty dramatically. So we're publishing articles about that. But we also see it in the stories that we tell. Provost Kern mentioned stories being a very important part of this effort. And we see so many stories of students who come in and don't know their purpose, or know their purpose from their parents, because they told them very clearly what their purpose is, and it ain't theirs, right? and so they kind of feel really trapped and pressured, and they come to our program and really expand their view of what purpose might be. And you see them really transforming and using that in ways that really sort of open up their worlds and also open up their sense of who they want to be in their lives. And so there are so many stories I can tell you, Keith, about students who've been through the program at Wake Forest and really been changed by it. And I think that's what I think is important. I think it's easy for us to think about evidence only as being quantitative evidence. There's so much evidence that we can see from qualitative evidence, from history, from actually storytelling that really shows what a good life is. These great traditions that we are all formed by across ages were often storytelling traditions where people lifted up exemplars and examples of good character to inspire us. And I think in our current moment, who in our history can be exemplars for us that might inspire us with character and conscience to do the work we need to do now. So I think there's various kinds of evidence, but I think growing evidence that this does matter. And I think Rick's got a great paper on this showing the ways that different virtues do support flourishing and well-being. I think in the next decade, there'll be even more research on this crucial connection.
That's great. And actually, my last question also kind of connects to Rick, because you mentioned exemplars, and there were the great exemplars, but there's also the exemplars of us in our daily living and our daily life, as you were mentioning. And I know for Rick in particular, he talks a lot. Rick is a great storyteller, as you well know, as many of the people in the room know. And he talks about his own undergraduate experiences and the people, one particular faculty member who was really a mentor to him, who inspired hope. And really, Rick would describe it as, it's not like he talked about hope every day. He just walked into the room as a hopeful person, as a person who was hopeful for the experiences of his students, and that influenced them and gave them the idea that they could achieve and that they could succeed. Yeah. You've written a book about hope. Yeah. How do you understand hope, and what gives you hope right now about higher education?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I spent 10 years of my life studying hope, trying to understand it, to grapple with it, to become more hopeful myself. And I think, what I've learned is that hope can be understood in various ways. It can be understood as an emotion we feel, or an attitude like optimism that we hold for the world, or as a virtue of character. And this more ancient idea of hope as a virtue really compels me. I think as a virtue, hope's not just something we feel occasionally or in ways that might kind of exceed its bounds, but it requires actually practicing and developing that kind of hope. And doing it in ways that actually is responsive to our world. Hope as a virtue avoids two key vices. One is despair, the lack of hope, perhaps the most obvious vice, right? But also presumption or false hope, right? If we actually hope too much or in the wrong things, that's not the virtue of hope, that's actually presumption. And so there's a real danger of either one of those vices, presumption or despair, encouraging complacency or complicity, right? If we can't achieve something that's not possible, we despair of it, and therefore we give up. Or if we're already assuming it's going to happen anyway, we're presumptuous, we actually also give up. We don't do the work that we need to actually make a difference. And so I think hope as a virtue, that kind of difficult hope, what Wendell Berry calls difficult hope, motivates good work, right? And I think right now we need good work. And I think the more we can do good work with that kind of hope, where even if we don't feel very hopeful, we can enact hope through our actions and practice it in those moments of real temptation toward despair. I think we'll be able to create conditions for higher education and for the world that actually make possibility much more expansive. So I think what I see in higher education now is actually a lot of temptations toward despair, and I think for good reason. We can't be blind to those realities. I think otherwise we'd be presumptuous. Yeah. But we also see in this room, in the work of the coalition, and the work of our Educating Character Initiative, is a lot of faculty who are so energetic and creative in this. A lot of staff who are so energetic and creative in this. I think that combination of faculty and staff coming together to really build character and build communities is vital. And I see a lot of that happening now. It's not always visible, but I do see the undercurrents of that bubbling up in very unexpected places, and that gives me great hope.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think the people in the room are hopeful. I think that's one of the reasons that they are here. Yeah. And I'm sure they're hopeful in the way that they work with their students, and hopeful in what we can achieve together through the coalition and through your work and the work of others. I want to open it up now to questions from the audience. I think we have microphones that are going to be going around. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll run to you and get you a mic.
Excellent.
Thanks. I'm Rob Vischer. I'm president of St. Thomas in the Twin Cities, and we have a lot of work going on university-wide on purpose and vocation. We also have some work, not nearly as much on virtue and character, and I'm conscious of bandwidth, so we're not trying to go in too many directions, and I'm wrestling with how to bring those into one stream.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've thought about it more than I have. How do you articulate how the impetus to move forward with our students on purpose and vocation is actually closely related to what you're doing on virtue and character?
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we're actually thinking about a lot at Wake Forest now, with some discussions we're having there about purpose and character in that way. I think, as I see the relationship is that purpose really gives the the aim, or to use the Greek word, the telos of character, where we kind of directed toward this ultimate aim. And so we need to have students have a sense of their purpose, vocation, to be able to kind of know what they're pursuing in life. Because, if you think about a bullseye, a target, this is that metaphor from Aristotle, that if we have all the strength in the world, but aim at the wrong target, right, we won't be a very good archer, right? We have to have the right target to use our capacities in that way. But also, if we don't have the right strengths, right, and the right sort of guidance of the virtues, we won't be able to sort of hit a target that's very far, right? So we need those kind of capacities of agency that help us resist fear, to resist despair, to pursue and do hard things across time and across circumstances, to be honest in our own pursuits and about ourselves, to recognize our limits, humility, and also the possibilities through hope. So I think these virtues are really the enablers of our purpose. So without the virtues, our purpose can be quite inert. The virtues give life, motivation, force to do that. Also, as Keith mentioned earlier, implicitly, they also give guardrails to what our purposes might be. There's been a lot of recovery of purpose language in the last decade or so, but it's easy for that purpose language to be purpose of what that business is or what that university is without thinking about the moral constraints of purpose. So purpose becomes just making the bottom line bigger, right? Or making your prestige more expansive, right? So I think the character actually gives the moral constraints on what can count as good kinds of purpose that may move beyond ourselves. So I think that's how I think about it in my own context. But we'll love to talk more maybe in the break about that. There.
Yeah, got one over here.
Hi there, I'm Amy, and I'm a faculty member at the University of Mississippi in the rhetoric department, so I appreciate all the Aristotle.
Yeah.
But I have a question, especially in this class that you're teaching.
Yeah.
To what extent you engage students in hard conversations about high-profile exemplars that are seemingly succeeding despite a lack of virtue and character? And because we have all these excellent exemplars, but to what extent do you engage these negative ones?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy. And I think, in rhetoric, that exemplars can serve various purposes and functions in making a persuasive case. We study Aristotle's rhetoric in this course, think about how they might do that themselves. And I think that counter-exemplars or negative exemplars are a really important part of this work. And so one thing we do is really kind of demystify what makes an exemplar and to also recognize that even those who might be heroic actually are quite flawed too, right? And so just recognizing that human beings are quite complex is very important for us. And in fact, to go back to what Keith said earlier, it's not the heroes who are often most impactful motivationally for students. It's actually those who are just above them in some way. So what's called relevant and attainable exemplars, those who may be just a little bit older or maybe a little bit sort of, wiser, who also are like them in some way, are often more compelling than these heroic figures who might be so good, I can never be like Gandhi or King or name your hero, right? And so we do a lot of work with those kind of relevant exemplars. But I think the idea of negative exemplars is really crucial right now. And I think what we often do is try to help students grapple with both our culture's elevation of that person, often based on power or fame or status in some way. And the thing about, are those the goods of a good life that you want to live? What might be other ways you might care about the good life? And what are the traps or hazards of those external goods like power or fame or status or money, right? And does that actually make a good life good? So we have them debate that in these various ways. And what they often think about is when they think about their friendships, right, or their families, it's not those things that matter, it's actually the character, it's the relationships that really grounded those. So the more we can get it beyond just the culture wars around these big high-profile leaders and in their own lives, where it becomes real for them that day, that really matters a lot for students recognizing the value of this work. So giving assignments that not only think about this abstractly, comparing this thinker with that thinker, but actually help them actually apply that work to their own friendships or their own character can really help them grapple in ways that make it much more personal and I think much more relevant to them. So I think I would encourage all of you doing this work to really find creative ways to make it personal. We often avoid that in academy, right? It seems uncomfortable. But there are ways to do it in intellectually rigorous ways that actually can also help make that connection. And I found in my own courses that when you can connect the intellectual rigor and critical awareness with personal application, the investment, the motivation, the engagement just skyrockets. So I think that's what I've been doing. I think it's worked pretty well for us. But I'd be eager to hear what you all do there and how you might be doing that in your own context. Thanks.
There's one in the back. Yep.
Hello, I'm Abdurrahim Agnaw from Al Akhawan University in Ifran, Morocco. One of the latest institutions to join this coalition. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and thoughts. My question is about, from a developmental perspective, what are the metrics that you use to track students' character formation, and what are the major milestones in that process? Thank you.
That's a great question, and a really difficult question because it's really hard to measure character, right? It's one of those very elusive topics, and I think to apply our scientific standards to it, it can be quite challenging, and it's also being done in really important ways. And there are various ways to do that. We, in our program, identify certain key virtues for various classes that we want to foster. We do pre- and post surveys of those virtues using scales that have been validated by scientists to then measure before and after what their change was. We also have control groups who then aren't in that class, who then can see, okay, what's really happening here based on this course versus other parts of being at this university or college. We also use a lot of qualitative data. We use reflections, we use interviews and focus groups. We have them do a lot of writing about their own experiences and sort of interpreting what they're learning throughout their time in college. That's been very important for us. We often see the most growth in those qualitative reflections. So that's been crucial. We also think about not just the virtues and purpose, but also questions of well-being and flourishing, right? About even their own motivation to be engaged as a student. We have a great program called the Principal Pluralism Fellowship over the summer to help students engage across differences and do research on how to engage people who are very different from them, then practice that over 8 weeks, right? With really intense discussions about these important issues, and then to have a joint writing project at the end with people who are different from them to actually practice coming together around a common project. That is hard to do, right? Many of us, I'm sure, don't like group work, especially hard when actually it's somebody who's very different from you in that way. And we've actually measured not only their growth in certain virtues like humility or their awareness of how to deal with conflict, but also they're better writers, right? Because they actually are doing this work to understand their opposition and how to better persuade them. So actually their writing's improving in ways that's really remarkable. So I think character can have an upstream impact on other outcomes that we really care about in the university context. So those are some examples that might give you a sense of how we're doing it at Wake Forest. I think there's a lot of work happening on this. Wendy Fishman has a great book on this. She's doing a lot of work on colleges and how they think about character now. And so I think there's a lot of work happening in this space, but it's still emerging. And I think we're still trying to get the best sort of resources and scales to understand its impact. I will say one more thing. One thing I've really valued as far as ways of measuring character is the work of learning well. Marjorie, in your work, I think what I value about those is as stories. They actually show exemplars of this that make it really concrete. We can talk about character all day, and I'm a philosopher. I could do that a long time. But actually grounding this in actual stories of people doing this work and seeing how they're doing it and what they're facing in terms of challenges and opportunities, I think is really valuable for us. The more we can tell our stories about this through magazines or through our own sort of storytelling, I think is really important. So I just want to lift up stories being a very important part of this effort.
That's great. Yeah, storytelling is a big part of the coalition, of course, as well. There were a couple questions down in front as well. Or it's one in the back. Okay, we'll go there.
Hi, I'm Rick Stepp from University of Florida. I have actually a two-part question. First, I'm just really curious what your father ended up saying when you wrote the letter to him about getting rid of tobacco. But the more substantive question, I suppose. I was talking with our former athletic director recently, and he had come into the university at a time of a lot of turmoil. There were sanctions against several of the programs, and transformed the program into one of the most successful in the country, national championships, et cetera. And he attributed much, if not all, of the success to a relentless focus on character. So I'm wondering how you've articulated with athletic programs in your own work, because I think that's pretty common in at least ones that are doing well, and what we can learn from them. Thanks.
Yeah, great questions. My dad is really a very thoughtful father, and he really valued my thoughts on it. We had a long conversation about it, and multiple ones about it. We ended up reducing our output and then eventually stopped growing tobacco a few years later. Part of that was based on he lost his labor force. We went to college, so he couldn't keep working as much. But also, there was a national buyout at that point after some big major settlements where the government, who used to support tobacco farmers by giving them quotas and support, actually then had a settlement. And so we took the settlement and got out of that growing. The one challenge is, like any other challenge, though, is that economic systems are built on certain ways of being and doing. And so what in our own system now is built on how we sort of engage others as being necessities, and how do we reimagine what necessities are in that way to kind of have a more expansive imagination. So that's how that went, but I'd be happy to talk more about that. On the athletes portion, I think that's also really important and I think really relevant, because now we have facing various realities, including financial realities, that come along with college athletics. And what that means for our campuses, how does that affect what we prioritize? How do we think about continuing this work, but also doing it in ways that's intentional and thoughtful and wise, as realities are shifting just constantly every day. And so I think character is all the more important in that work now. Most college athletes won't go on to be professionals, right? I think less than 2% actually go on to be professionals in any way. And so 98% of college athletes go on to do other things in their lives. And so how do we use athletics to help train them to be leaders of character in those contexts, and use the field and the court and the road as ways to do that work? And so at Wake Forest, we have a whole staff person devoted to character and athletics. They work with our coaches to design workshops for their teams. They do individual mentoring with individual student athletes. They have retreats for captains and others on different teams to think about their own character, their own leadership. And I think that's been really important for our culture at Wake Forest. And I hope as we do this work more broadly across the U.S., where athletics becomes not just this thing you do to perform or produce or to make money, but a way of being formed that makes you a better person, a better human being, a better teammate, a better leader, someone who's humble about their own limitations, willing to pass the ball when they know someone else can make the shot, but also resilient and hardworking toward things they really care about. So I do think that character in athletics is a really crucial component, and there's a lot of work to be done to make it even more expansive.
Question over here, then maybe we'll go over there.
Thank you. Reese Brown, Human Flourishing Program. So I think your last remarks are a good segue to this question, which is I've been thinking a lot about the college university space as a market and demand and supply in that market. As you know, Dr. Lamb, the Flourishing Program does research on human flourishing, which is a lot like, in this space, selling a system for measuring rainwater in the desert. And what I'm curious about is that, the U.S., we have massive demand for college and universities. You give out lots of resources, you do a lot of programming. Where are you seeing demand specifically from parents and students in university spaces for character programming, character education, and the sort of stuff we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question, and when I think about it a lot, I think what we see is that different stakeholders have different sort of reasons why it might matter. So, like university presidents struggling with retention, right, or recruitment, can often use character to help sort of build communities of culture and cultures that actually help form students in ways that keep them there or bring them there in some ways. You also have parents who want their kids to be formed in a particular way and therefore are eager to have programs that really help to emphasize these important values. So we've also found at Wake Forest that many students have expressed, even in our surveys, that our programs around character and purpose are what draw them to Wake Forest over other schools. So we actually see students choosing Wake Forest because of these programs, and that's been a very important part of our effort to really solidify them. I think you also see this from a wider angle, but it's being smart about what actually makes a difference for your stakeholders. So here's one example. We're the program for leadership and character, right? And many students this generation, up to 90% in some cases, want to be leaders, right, of a certain kind. They would sign up for a program on character, right? And those who didn't might not need it because they probably signed up for a program on character, right? So it's those who actually want leadership roles. And so we use leadership as motivation for them to actually show them what matters. But then that leadership actually based on character is a better kind of leadership. So tapping into existing motivations in ways that honor who they are and what they're seeking, but then expanding that imagination, I think can be a very effective way for us to really help students who might not see that character matters in the way we think it does, have a broader imagination for it. So I think finding ways you can tap into students. So maybe students are student athletes who want to perform well on the court or on the field, right? How can actually having better character help them be better performers, better athletes, right? How do those who want to be better students learn certain virtues like resilience or justice or courage? It might help them be better students. So trying to find ways to connect with existing motivations and then expand motivations to actually eventually bring character into the center of that.
Question over here, or don't worry. Or
Sorry, thank you for your talk. It was really inspiring. Heather Walter from the George Mason University. I'm a professor of special education. I have been doing this work for a while, but particularly with students with disabilities as well, or teachers who are going to be in the classrooms to teach students with disabilities. And I often find it really challenging to make this work really concrete, especially in the categories of relationships and just like the actual virtues or characters or well-being constructs. And especially in the university context now, we have a lot of students who are coming in with different disabilities or that are on the continuum, either diagnosed or not diagnosed. Have you done anything in your research, or have you worked or have implemented any strategies or supports that have helped all students?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's been some increasing research on character and disability studies, and so a colleague and friend Adam Curitan at Tennessee has a paper on character and disability studies and how character must be attuned to ways that disabilities work. Adam himself is blind, and so he thinks about this a lot. He's a philosopher who really thinks about his own experiences and how it affects his own life. Also out of the Ivy School of Business in Canada at Western University, they have some work on sort of autism and character, how that might actually sort of inform our views about autism and how to support students with autism. In our own work, I think one thing that's very important for us is personal mentoring, because the real work of character happens in one-on-one relationships. And so we've put a lot of effort not only in planning programs and courses, which are great, but also mentoring outside of those courses. So the last 4 years, we had over 1,700 hours of one-on-one mentoring from our staff, students at Wake Forest, right? That's a pretty big commitment of our time to make mentoring a part of this work, right? So I do think that, I think those relationships, especially for students who might have higher needs, are especially important. So I think what I'll say, and that maybe is a kind of way to conclude here, is that we often think about character as about creating programs, right? Programs are really important. But it's the people who lead the programs, who support students in the programs that make the real difference. So if you have a great character program, a plan, but not a community of care to support it, then that program won't have the effect that you might intend. And so I think in all this talk of plans and courses and curricula, which I all think I support, we can't forget the people and the way that the care is the foundation of this work. We found at Wake Forest, for example, that over 4 years of our students in our program, the single most important factor in their growth, they reported to us, was the quality of their friendships with diverse peers and their faculty staff mentorships, right? Those things move the dial the most. So I think in all our efforts to build strategic frameworks and plans and programs, we have to send to the people who might be part of those plans. I think that's where the character growth works. Now, the challenge is it's really time intensive and it's really staff intensive. Therefore, it's really expensive. Right? And so we have to make some hard decisions about what matters to us. But I do think that the more we can train faculty who are already there to do this work, train staff, as we're doing also at Wake Forest, to do this work, and empower our people already there to do character work, I think that can really help to leaven our whole community in ways that really make character central, but also make it effective and enduring.
Yeah, that's a great comment. It obviously connects really well to the coalition, which is really focused on caring and support of our students is a central part of what faculty and staff and everyone associated with education need to do. That's a great comment. We have time, I think, for a couple questions, maybe one or two questions more. I know, Alex, you had your hand up for a while. If we can get a mic over there. Or either way.
I'm Alexandra Baton-Bailey from the Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Florida. And I think the last question kind of segues really well into what I wanted to ask about, which is everyday influencers or exemplars, as you call them, which are really the faculty and the graduate students and the future faculty.
Yeah.
And I hear you talk about, preparing folks to do that work because they really are the single most influential folks, those who are there now and those who will be there in the future. Can you tell me a little bit about how you prepare them to see themselves as those influencers and to do that work in their everyday actions, right? Because they're the everyday
exemplars,
everyday magic, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And so we've been really focused on how we equip them to do that in ways that they can be intentional about. So we have this faculty workshop every summer. We give a 3-day workshop and a small grant for faculty to design new courses on character leadership in their own field. So these could be courses in mathematics or medicine, law or literature. I mean, a wide variety of courses that they all design. And we have a 3-day workshop as part of that where we train them in what character is, what leadership is, how to develop character based on the best practices, how to assess your assignments, assess your learning in various ways. And we've had now over 110 faculty in that workshop, which at a place like Wake Forest makes a big difference, right, at really making this something common. We're also doing things that now reach staff. So many staff have mentoring roles on campuses that really form character in profound ways. And there's often been this division between faculty and staff. We're trying to really bridge that divide because I think staff are so crucial. In my own life in college, I had amazing faculty mentors and amazing staff mentors who made my life so much better. And so we're now leading staff workshops where student-facing staff can come to our program in the summer and learn about how to do this work in their own programming and their own work. We had last week the head of our campus recreation department, who has a ton of student employees, right, through intramural sports and the gym, asked to do a whole training for his entire staff of 200 students on character, right? So he really cares about this through a staff training he learned about last year. We're now beginning to develop plans for a staff certificate program where you can actually do 6 workshops with our program on various virtues and strategies and get a certificate for leadership and character that you can have as a professional development opportunity, right? So how do you incentivize this in ways that make faculty and staff really engaged? And so grants over the summer for faculty really help. Certificates for staff are really useful as well. So that's how we're doing it in our own places. We're also trying to learn how to do it better. So if you have ideas that you're working on with your faculty and staff, we'd love to hear it. I think we're beginning to make it known in orientation as well for new faculty and staff that we're doing this work. And so I think there's a lot of possibilities for how we might make it part of our culture going forward. But we have more work to do, right? We have more work to do.
One last question, Maria. You want?
Maria Gally Stampino from the University of Miami. I could ask a philosophical question about how character can get weaponized.
Yes.
It's happening in Italy right now.
Yes.
And we could talk about, Aristotle, Augustine, Dante, not a woman in sight, but I won't go there. I do want to ask a question about the fact that students come to us at age 18. We know that their brains are still developing, but they have been exposed to the notion of character or examples of character through their families, their communities, their schooling. And so my question is really about whether you've encountered crisis in individuals, right, who come to Wake Forest with the idea that making more money faster is a defining character of character, a defining facet of character, only to encounter something deeply troubling. And if you have, what advice do you have for those of us, faculty or staff or near peers? Because I've encountered those, and those are not easy conversations.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a really great question. I do want to name, I think you're absolutely right. Character has and can still be weaponized. And so using this language is really important for us to figure out what we're actually doing with it. And so how we think about what are our sources of character, what kind of character we're really promoting is crucial to this work. And we're trying at Wake Forest to be a much more expansive view of that. Even the texts we assign are very much more diverse than those for that very reason. I think that's crucial work. We have had students do this. In my first week of my class on commencing character, I have them in their very first week write their vision of their purpose in life. Right? Then we read some text about their purpose the next week, and we think about how it changes. And then the very final week, we have them actually write a whole reflection on their purpose after the whole course. And what's striking about this, we actually have 2 papers on purpose in this course, actually how it shifted, was a major shift in that first week of college where their parents' influence is very, very strong, and the voices are still in their head, where they haven't really thought about character very much. They've thought about a job and money or status in a certain field, being a doctor, right? Or a lawyer or something else. Or now maybe an influencer, right? You have that coming up as one role. And then after the course, I realized that, what I realized was that was not really my purpose. That was somebody's foisted on me by my community, my family, my parents, or my internalized sense of what I ought to be. And so we found that students often shift in several ways. They report having a more beyond the self purpose, that it goes beyond just their own success, fame, money, power. They also report having more tools to keep discerning it. Because one thing that's really important for us is that you don't just find your purpose and, aha, there it is, I'm set, and there it goes, 18 years old, I got 70 years ahead of me, my purpose, right? It's not that way. And so we try to also debunk the myth that purpose is this sort of static thing, and it's always changing, it's always moving based on our context, our communities, our callings in different areas. And so they begin to see that their purpose is not quite as firm as it was. Mm-hmm. And that's actually a good thing, because it means they have more agency and more identity in their own formation of that purpose that might fit them, not their exemplars or their influences. And so I think creating that reflective space to honor where they're coming from, but also to help them sort of gently imagine a different way is crucial. So we also that first week do what we call a character autobiography. We have a series of 4 or 5 prompts. They respond with free writing to who are your influences, your communities, your family, your friends, your culture. And then they're not blank slates coming into college. And so let's help them be aware of that and then be reflective about, is that who I want to be now? Or how can I relate to that influence in ways that might make me more sort of self-conscious and perhaps more intentional about that influence? And so I think those moments of drawing students into their own reflection and seeing that not as just kind of outside the classroom, but a crucial part of what it means to reflect on lived experience as a source of our knowledge, not just from books or lectures, but actually from our own experience. I think that's crucial. And I think that really helps to shift what education is, not just from this abstract or artificial sort of detached ideas or facts, but actually to things that actually can live in us. And that's really enlivening for them and also for teachers. I feel enlivened by this work because I'm doing it myself now. And that makes my teaching much more grounded. I think I'm much more open, and I'm also open to learning in ways that I wouldn't be if I was just professing facts or theories. And so I think that kind of enlivening of teaching, I think is one part of this work that I think is so valuable for us as educators that often is not mentioned, but is crucial to why this matters so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. This has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you being here, getting here in the middle of the night, driving all the way from Jacksonville, and for really talking about the work that you do, your experiences with students, and how we can all learn from that and how the coalition can grow as we begin to explore even more what the role of character is in our work and relating it to identity, agency, purpose, and belonging, all the things that we do. So join me in thanking Michael.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Really great. Thank you.